Plague doctors never truly had a good reputation. A lingering sense of corruption was associated with them, and they rarely cured their patients, but rather tended to exploit them to get the most out of them before they died. Naturally, citizens usually saw their presence in the area as a sign to leave. Their typical appearance was associated with death and horror, because it was usually the last image their patients saw before they died. You could say that this is an analogy for what your enemies in Elden Ring will see right before they die as well, when you play as my Golden Order Plague Doctor. On one hand, the Plague Doctor has the gifts of the Holy and is tied closely to the Golden Order, but corruption runs through the veins of this mysterious individual. The Golden Order Plague Doctor is extremely cunning and climbed the ranks through deception because paradoxically this individual is tied heavily to death itself as well, as evidenced by his capabilities to cast death sorceries and forbidden magic. The duality of the Golden Order Plague Doctor is a nice allegory for how good and evil can sometimes just be so close to each other. Our Golden Order Plague Doctor was merely a death mage specialized in certain sorceries while possessing a very powerful sword before this death mage became the Golden Order Plague Doctor. The Golden Order Plague Doctor is my Int and Fate mid to late game build, and the continuation to my Death Mage early to mid game get OP early build. Int and Fate is now stronger than ever, and this is thanks to a bunch of buffs to Int, Fate sorceries and incantations, and this is really now becoming a trend as these sorceries and incantations just keep getting buffed every few patches. With all these buffs, it is now the best time to play an Int and Fate build. But for this build, you'll also want to pick up the Death's Poker though. This is the Plague Doctor's main weapon and works amazing within an Int Fate build. Thematically, it fits perfectly and it's also a really strong weapon. One of the strongest in the game, for sure. Now, Sword of Night and Flame is still in the possession of the Plague Doctor, and it's also really good mid to late game, with now the possibility to have a higher upgraded sword and even more stats, so really even better now. It is also the only weapon in the game that actually scales with both Int and Fate, so it would only make sense to have it included for this build, right? I won't go into detail about this weapon or showcase it again though, because I already did in part 1. So check that video out if you want to know everything you want to know about the new buffed version of Sword of Night and Flame, and just how to get OP early and make the strongest possible Int and Fate mage build right at the start of the game. In the mid and late game, an Int Fate build really starts to shine, because you get access to a lot of different things and you can truly shape it up and optimize your Int Fate build. Now you might think, Deathspoker, what is Deathspoker doing in this build? Deathspoker scales pretty badly with intelligence, has no scaling with fate whatsoever, and primarily scales with dexterity and strength, so why the f would you use it in an Int Fate build? And if you thought that, then yeah, you would be technically right actually. But the Deathspoker, however, has a powerful secret that makes it not only a good choice for an Int and Fate build, it makes it probably the best choice. I will go over this secret later on in this video, when we get to the stats, and you'll see why it's so good. Now you can pick up Deathspoker quite early on actually in Caelid, our favorite region, and thus start working on making the Plague Doctor relatively early on as well. When you upgrade Deathspoker and get some more points in Int, this thing will start dealing insane damage, making it a very OP choice for the mid and late game. Now you want to use Deathspoker mainly for its Ash of War, Ghost Flame Ignition. Ghost Flame Ignition comes in 3 forms. The first form is the standard one that happens if you just cast the Ash of War without any further input. You will get an explosion right in your enemy's face and do some damage. The second option is casting the Ash of War, and then while casting it, following it up with an R1 or a normal attack input, giving you this powerful explosion that will also leave a trail behind that deals really good damage over time. Then the third option is casting the Ash of War, and while casting it, following it up with an R2 input or a heavy attack basically, giving you a massive explosion that covers a bigger area. Now the one using R1 or the explosion with a trail is the most powerful one, and you definitely want to use that versus bosses and just most of the time really. The trail and the explosion combined will just deal insane damage and pretty much proc frostbite on your enemies really quickly. Oh yeah, I didn't say it, but Ghost Flame Ignition also builds up frostbite on your enemies, giving it this insane burst with the proc of the Frostbite and just the actual damage, so the magic damage from the Ash of War itself. You can easily deal up to like 7 to 10k damage within just one hit. Add to that with Death's Poker you can just brute force yourself through a lot of situations with my setup. You barely have to pay attention to what is happening. Just use the Ash of War, and you can also just spam it, cast it a few times in a row, and you will deal incredible damage. And you only need 50 intelligence to really get such ridiculous damage output. As you know, this is a hybrid int and fate build, so that requirement works out very well. But using Death's Poker in an int fate build over just an int build gives you the extra possibility to run int fate sorceries, int fate incantations, just normal int sorceries and normal fate incantations in combination with it. So it opens up a whole new dimension with a lot of possibilities. The death sorceries in the game have exactly the same background and aesthetics as Ghost Flame Ignition, so it only makes sense to run these in conjunction, right? Now from what you just saw, you know that the Plague Doctor is insanely lethal. And so far you have only seen his main weapon in action. But now let's also go over the sorceries and incantations that the Plague Doctor masters. For your buffs, you definitely want to run Golden Vow, it is too good. It gives you a nice boost to your damage output and makes you even more tanky. You'll also want to run Black Flame Protection. Black Flame Protection has a higher fate requirement, but since we're running a hybrid build, we can run it in fact. And this incantation is really nice in the setup, especially because we are running a hybrid build. So we are quite limited on spending runes on stats if you cap yourself. Black Flame Protection compensates for that problem really well, because it means we have a lower investment in things like Vigor and can still be very tanky. This incantation will increase your physical damage indication with up to 35%. Now in terms of damage spells, let's first start off with the Golden Order incantations. Out of all the Golden Order incantations in the game, there are only 3 that are worth running in my opinion. But these 3 are really good, so it is more than enough and covers you for whatever you want to do, especially after the recent patch. Let's start off with Discus of Light. Discus of Light only costs 3 FP now and is buffed in every aspect possible. The developers went nuts on this spell. It barely costs any FP, and with a single cast you can easily deal up to 1k damage. So 3 FP for 1k damage. You do the maths, and it's a ranged ability, making it now the most efficient spell in the game. You can just safely and quickly kill a lot of mobs or even bosses like this and just have a really smooth time. So you want to use Discus of Light basically like a bread and butter type of spell to weave in quick damage, or just to reliably destroy mobs and bosses, because as you see, it definitely works. The other 2 Golden Order incantations are going to be your AoE spells for this build. If you don't have time and the situations you're in is pretty hectic, then you'll want to use Triple Rings of Light. This is a really nice and fun spell to use. It is basically Discus of Light on steroids, and you can just spam it even though it's an AoE spell. And this way you will quickly deal a bunch of damage to a bunch of targets. It is amazing for various boss fights in the game that consists out of more than just one boss, or just whenever you're facing a lot of mobs at the same time or are in dungeons, you can quickly destroy everything like that with Triple Rings of Light. Now the other Golden Order AoE ability, Radican's Rings of Light, deals more damage, but it also takes a longer time to cast. So if the situation allows for it and you have a little bit more time, or you can actually plan your AoE, then definitely go for Radican's Rings of Light. It is really good AoE damage, and you can even cast it through various structures in the game. So if you position yourself correctly, you can destroy bosses like this very quickly, especially when again you're fighting multiple bosses at the same time. In the open world or dungeons, if you cast it, everything just dies. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. This makes it the perfect tool for just clearing areas quickly, and usually you'll even kill things that you didn't even know were there. Now using holy damage based incantations solely is not enough, with how resistant a good portion of the late game bosses in Elden Ring are to it. But learn your enemies' resistances, and whenever you can use your Golden Order abilities, make sure to use them, because they're really fun to use and, like you just saw, are very deadly as well. And outside the context of bosses, they will always work well in the open world and dungeons, so keep that in mind as well. The resistances to holy damage isn't a problem for our Plague Doctor, because the Plague Doctor is a hybrid build, and with Death's Poker you can destroy every enemy easily. Even when you're fighting stuff with immunity to frostbite and resistances to pretty much everything, the Death's Poker magic damage will still deal insane burst damage, so resistances or immunities are never a problem with this build. Add to that the Plague Doctor is a very complex individual. He has two sides. Now for death sorceries, the two sorceries you want to use are Ancient Death Rancor and Explosive Ghost Flame. The rest are not really worth your time. And Tibia Summons has gotten like 8 million buffs and is still shit, so buff Tibia Summons another 4 or 5 times and we will consider it in the future. Now you'll want to use Ancient Death Rancor and Explosive Ghost Flame as your setup sorceries to combo with your Death's Poker. As I showed you in part 1, with Ancient Death Rancor's stun lock ability, due to every spirit staggering your enemy, it sets up nicely for your main ability to quickly erase the existence of whatever you're fighting, without you needing to worry about them retaliating in any capacity. The combination between these two is just too good. Explosive Ghost Flame is going to be your trap type of ability basically, and it also serves a similar purpose as with Ancient Death Rancor. It ignites the ground in Ghost Flame, which again staggers your enemies and does good damage over time, while also building up frostbite on your enemies. After you kill Morgoth, I would also pick up the Regal Omen Baron from his Remembrance. This is a tool actually, not an incantation or a sorcery, so you do have to put it in your pouch, but it's a really nice tool and you can just always use it. It basically has the same function as Ancient Death Rancor, but it exerts even more pressure for a higher FP cost on your opponent, and with it you can do great combos as well. Just use this and follow up with Ghost Flame Ignition with your Death's Poker and you'll one-shot bosses easy peasy. Now finally, Rykard's Rancor. This seems to be a death sorcery as well if you actually look at its icon and if you just look at how it looks in game, but it's not classified as one. So that is pretty weird, but by now we are used to weird things in the world of Elden Ring. Now, you know what would be pretty weird as well? If you reached this point in the video and still didn't give the video a like, or if you're still not subscribed to me. But thankfully you did give the video a like and are in fact subscribed to me, right? Right? Rykard's Rancor is situationally very good or very bad. The situations where you actually want to use it is versus big things. You can just spam it and it will quickly completely destroy large targets such as giants and dragons. So in other words, make sure to use this as your main ability when fighting large enemies and bosses, and make sure that the boss you're fighting is actually in its path so you get all those juicy explosions stacking for quick kills. Now for my Golden Order Plague Doctors, I just use theme-based sorceries and incantations, so it fits with the aesthetic and theme that I'm going with my Int and Fate build. But the beauty of this build is that it's a hybrid build with so much flexibility and so much possibilities. We can run normal sorceries and normal incantations that don't have any fate or intelligence requirements respectively in addition. Both our staff and seal that we're going to use scale with intelligence and fate. So as long as you meet the requirement for any sorcery or incantation, you can just use it and it will properly deal amazing damage through our int fate scaling. A few off-theme recommendations from my side would be Giant's Flame Take D for insane single target burst damage, Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike or Burnout Flame for amazing AoE or single target damage over time and give you that one-shot capability, and Comet Azure if you just want to cheese a lot of boss fights. If you are able to get some more points in intelligence through either gear or a flask crystal tier or just more points in intelligence, then adding Rennie's Dark Moon is a really nice option as well. So you can use it as an opener to get that debuff going on your enemies. And finally, a good off-team sorcery versus things that move a lot is Stars of Rune, since it tracks your enemies really good and you have this guaranteed way of dealing damage reliably. And really there are no limits to this, you can even add Carrion Phalanx to your kit as a nice defensive sorcery. Now, like I said, I didn't use any of them just to stay on theme, but with everything in the Plague Doctor's original kit, like I showed you, you have already a very good foundation and solid kit that can just destroy anything easily within a few seconds. Now, some more combos that you can do is using the Deathspoker Ghost Flame Ignition to proc Frostbite on your enemies and get insane burst, then swap over to your Sword of Night and Flame, use the Fire Stance on your Sword of Night and Flame, which will also pack a nice punch, and with that you will remove the Frostbite debuff on your enemy, and this way you can swap back again to your Deathspoker and once again proc Frostbite with Ghost Flame Ignition. Like I showed you with the Elden Beast example, without the Frostbite proc the damage is already insane, so you don't have to do this, but it's a nice way to reset the initial Frostbite proc and just keep proccing the burst of the Frostbite debuff over and over. This also adds some more depth to the build. So our main weapon is the Deathspoker, then supported with Sword of Night and Flame, either for the combos or fun when you just want to deal great damage from a larger distance. Regarding your seal and staff for this build, you'll want to run Prince of Death Staff. It scales the best for Int Fate for the stats that I will show you in a second, and the higher you go in Int and Fate, the better it will scale and the better your damage output will be. Basically, it also boosts our death sorceries with 10% extra damage. Then for your shield, you'll want to use the Golden Order shield, which will boost the damage output of your Golden Order incantations with 10% as well, and it's the only seal in the game that scales with both intelligence and fate. So both type of spells in our kit get covered this way, and we completely optimize our damage output. Now let's get into the setup of this build. For gear, I mostly try to emulate a Golden Order Plague Doctor type of vibe, while also trying to optimize the build. In terms of aesthetics, it's a mix between darker elements but also lighter elements, as you can see. The headpiece is the most important one for the looks. It's the Marionette Soldier bird helm, which is the closest thing I could find that looks like the original Plague Doctor bird-like beak mask, and if you ask me, this thing rocks. If you really want to optimize it, you can also run this thing and get a buff to your damage output for your Golden Order incantations. But come on, the bird helm might not give you a boost in game, but it will definitely spiritually give you a major boost, as it's 1,000 times cooler. Then Radahn's line armor and gauntlets. Aesthetically, it is a very nice set and a nice combination between dark and gold. For the trousers, I use the Spellblade trousers. Spellblade trousers actually buff your Ashes of Wars that deal magic damage. So with this, we will get a nice damage boost to our Deathspoker, as well as our Sword of Night and Flames nightstands. But this exact combination of these pieces also make us reach that 50 poise threshold. Don't worry guys, I made sure that it all ties in together. So with this setup, you will reach the threshold for resisting poise breaking hits, which is definitely very nice because this is a cast heavy build, so you do want to minimize getting interrupted as much as possible. And when you play the game, you will know exactly what I'm talking about and will feel how nice it is to not get interrupted every few seconds. For talismans, I run both the Graven Mask Talisman and Flock's Canvas Talisman to boost both our sorceries and incantations damage output. If you have not unlocked them yet, you can also use their little brother counterparts till you get them. Then Radagon's Sword Shield, and usually I don't recommend using a Radagon's Sword Shield when you get to like the mid to late game due to the damage penalty, and it's just not that good anymore after 40 vigor. But with this build, it's just really nice because it makes sure we get both our strength and dexterity requirements for wielding our weapons and gives us a nice boost in endurance and vigor, while we can actually spend some more points on int and fate, assuming you cap yourself. Keep in mind, we run Black Flame Protection, so the damage penalty gets negated in fact. If capping yourself is not relevant for you, then Magic Scorpion Charm will be a nice alternative to boost a lot of our damage output. Final talisman slot will be the Shard of Alexander. We will use our Ash of War very intensively with this build, so a boost to its damage output makes a lot of sense. For the flask, it is easy. Get both the Holy Shrouding Crack tier and the Magic Shrouding Crack tier, so we get a nice boost to our damage output and cover both main types of our damage output. Now stats is a funny one. Well, not really, it is pretty linear actually. Whether you want to go for a level 125 or a level 150 build, you pretty much want to get at least 45 fate and 50 intelligence. Two reasons for this: our shield has significant scaling up to level 45 in both fate and intelligence. After that, it drops off quite heavily as well. So if you would only consider our shield, then spending points in fate or intelligence after getting 45 in both of them would be a waste of points. But our Ash of War on our Deathspoker has significant scaling up to 50 intelligence, so it is worth getting those 5 extra points in intelligence for that purpose. And now you know the secret behind the Death's Poker that I referenced before in this video. The game misleads you. What it shows in-game is not relevant for when you actually use the weapon, mostly for its Ash of War, which in my setup is what you 100% want to use all of the time. The Ash of War scales with intelligence and intelligence only. Not just a small portion either, no, intelligence catapults its damage to insanity. The Ash of War gets nothing from dexterity or strength, by the way, so you in fact have been completely fooled by the game if you thought that the Ash of War scales with either of those attributes, but thankfully now you know the real deal. If you don't give a horse shit about level caps and you want to go all out, go for a level 250 build and just use these stats. You will soft cap in every way possible, and yeah, do I really need to say more? The Prince of Death's staff keeps scaling pretty well, so I did actually put some additional points into intelligence and fate for a level 150 build. It will scale pretty well all the way till you get both 80 int and fate actually. Now regarding mind, endurance, vigor, basically the other type of stats, you will have them covered as well with these two stat distributions and have a nice amount of points in those as well. Now with all of that out of the way, you now know how to build the Golden Order Plague Doctor from A to Z. Let me reiterate once again, however, this is a hybrid build, so it is also built that way as you saw in various parts of this video. The real strength of this build is how versatile and fun it is, while also actually performing very well. You are truly covered for any type of situation with my Golden Order Plague Doctor, and it's very flexible. You can go off team or adjust it to your own liking and add your favorite incantations or sorceries because it allows for all of it. Many people seem to think that Int Fate is not a viable hybrid build in any shape or form, but as you see, it is very viable, very strong, very fun, and the recent buffs to this hybrid build puts this build in a really good spot now, and you can definitely beat the game with it easily. Have fun making and playing with my Golden Order Plague Doctor. I hope you enjoyed the video, leave a like if you did, subscribe if you're still not subscribed, and let me know your thoughts in the comments.